Welcome one, welcome all. Welcome to another episode of Fan Team Radio. I'm your host, Shayem Khan, joined by my co-host, Chris Odorizzi. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Mr. Sam Rappaport. Sam and Chris, what's up?
Hey guys, how's it
Hello,
going?
hello, hello.
Canada, Montreal. Man, I almost went to this race last year. Got a little rain shy, so I ended up not going. I wish I'd went, but yeah. So this track's awesome. Track has a lot of history to it. Fan favorite. Its first Grand Prix was in 1978. Got a 4.31 kilometer track. It's about 2.7 miles, 70 laps of a race today. And just because he's my boy, I'm going to say the lap record is held by Mr. Valtteri Bottas. But yeah, what a race today, guys. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, we got a lot of front end competition going on. I think it's 11 chips across the podium standards. So, great race, great outcome, good track. Sam, what were your initial thoughts on this race?
I thought it was mostly a good race. I felt like, especially in the beginning, Max, Alonso, and Hamilton were reasonably close. I know Max kind of pulled out ahead there, but it wasn't by his usual, 45 minutes. It was, I think, consistent for the most part, about like 4 or 5 seconds. And even in the very beginning, Hamilton kind of stayed with him about a second and a half or a couple seconds behind for a little bit, and then he started scrapping a little bit with Alonso before he got past. But it was more interesting and closer than I had expected.
Yeah, I think Mercedes, in our last episode, we talked a little bit about the comeuppance of Mercedes after their upgrades that they brought to Spain, right? And then I had kind of reserved my expectations for them to see if it persists through Canada and then Austria. Seems like they kept similar pace with Aston Martin, but at the end, Hamilton had to concede to Alonso, so they're probably just not there yet. I'd still put them at the solid number three. They've definitely put some distance between themselves and Ferrari, and I think the nature of this track, Lewis is very one of his favorite tracks. But then you also saw Ferrari keep pace and have both of their cars finished. What were your thoughts, Chris, on just the Mercedes upgrades and do you see promise in upwards and to the right, or do you think this will plateau off and this is going to be the extent of their performance this year?
Sure, yeah. I think Mercedes is going in the right direction. I think slapping some side pods on the car really helped them. I know Sam and I have had lots of offline discussions about that, but yeah, Hamilton felt kind of like back in form, like watching him jump off the line and get ahead immediately. And like Sam just mentioned, was staying pretty close to Max in the beginning. I was actually expecting like him to a little bit even closer. He was right outside of that second mark, and I was kind of hoping that he would get into DRS range. I think it was like 1.1, 1.2 for a second there, and I was like, come on, just get into that DRS range. But unfortunately, Max is Max, and there he's in the rocket ship. So, but yeah, like you said, Sham, I think Mercedes has taken a few steps forward, but I think their straight line speed is just lacking just slightly to get them to the point where they can like really compete for the top spot in the podium, which is why Aston Martin, I think, has a little bit better straight line speed and is able to close that gap. But ultimately, I think that they're on the right track to finding a potential championship winning car later in the season or next year.
Yeah, and Sam,
Side pods always helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, that's interesting. Sam, do you think it's just the side pause? Do you think it's James Allison coming in into his old role? What do you think is kind of fueling this Mercedes up and at least for the time being?
I think it's a combination of the side pods and a lot of I guess a lot of excitement, and to your point, forward momentum that comes with finally having a car that feels like it's in the right direction, even if it's not perfect. There's a lot of confidence that it brings, and I think that part of that is Hamilton and Russell just being able to have that confidence and say like, oh, even though the car is not Like we still have a lot of work to go, and yes, there's side pods, but there's a million other things that we have to still upgrade. But just having that confidence that they're finally in the right direction, I think they can trust the car a little bit more, and just having that confidence will go a long way, instead of sort of, even when you watch Hamilton during the last couple races, because he's more confident, he knows that the car can kind of hang on to those corners a little bit more, and he's not like he's not braking as early, and just sort of being able to push the car to the limits more than he has previously.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what led to Russell's demise, was maybe a little bit of overconfidence in the car, getting a little too heavy on the gas pedal coming out of nine. Because it looks like, I mean, it looks like he bumped the curb a little bit, but it looked like he was mostly within the limits, and then all of a sudden just put a little too much gas and lost the rear and went straight into the wall. But I was actually thinking about this a lot today, and I don't think that he should get too discouraged about it, because I think they are, like we talked about, on the up. I don't think this like is a huge detriment to Russell. Like I think, sometimes you just go a little too hard with your car and you end up in the wall, and that happens. But I think over the course of the season, he'll be able to sort of keep his place, make his points, and ultimately get where they want to be, and competing for podiums. So, but yeah, to Sam's point, I think now that Hamilton actually feels like he has a good stable car under him, he's able to start unlocking that championship caliber driver that he has been.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and there's one that I thought about too, in terms of, you can't really test the limits of a car confidently when you know that the car doesn't really have, when you already know the limits of the car, right? And I think that's what
Yeah.
Mercedes was running into earlier, is driving conservatively, making sure that they at least keep the car on track and try to get collect as many points as they can, even if it's not in the top 3 podium. Right now, I think Russell, testing that limit, and it's the wall of champions, so it's kind of a failure point for a lot of drivers. So if he had to crash anywhere, there would make the most sense. And I think him kind of just spinning out at the back end is testing what that those upgrades can do. And Russell is that kind of person. He's young, he's potentially a future champion, hopefully, and it's his style of driving is to be able to test a machine when it's good and when it's performing, and he's shown that at Williams. So I think Russell testing it to his limits, while we have Lewis kind of keeping a steady hand on things. It's a good mixture to get the most out of their to understand the most of that car and the limits that it has, while we're still in a season that's not really it could be seen as like a development season, and not really in competition for constructor champions or anything like that. So I don't know, I think thinking positively, now Russell, I don't think he'll repeat the same mistake twice, knowing what he knows now. I hope not. But then it also allows Mercedes to know, if this is something that Lewis should also watch out for, so he can also avoid those kinds of spin outs on his back end. And, it's what I will say though, is that Russell, remember last season when he was finishing P5 all the time? And
Mr.
I think
Consistent,
like
yeah.
that, yeah. And I think that was like probably not indicative of what he could potentially do. And what I mean by that is he can stay consistent, I think, when the team needs him to. I think he has that kind of discipline. But then right now, him showing signs of like, a little bit more explosiveness is a good thing. So going back to your point, Chris, I think it's a positive thing. I think, it's nothing to put up red flags about right now. Obviously, if it continues, the story will change, but it's something that, I think it's in the favor of Mercedes long term. So speaking of kind of, we're going to talk about Red Bull. They've been winning consistently. So I would love to get y'all's thoughts first on just essentially where we stand now with Red Bull. Are you still flabbergasted by the fact that they're winning consistently? Are you kind of bored of it? What are your thoughts on Red Bull's dominance over the last couple of races, or specifically Max Verstappen's dominance?
I'm not bored of it, only because when there's sheer dominance involved, it's sort of, I get to this place where I've gone from, oh, it's really like, the races are obviously more interesting when people are battling for first, but when someone gets so dominant, I'm kind of like, yeah, I like kind of want to see if you can actually win every single race over the course of the season. And I think, I was listening to another podcast earlier on in the season and even at the end of last year, and they were like, I think Red Bull's going to win, most, if not every race. And going into it, I was like, yeah, maybe, but there's always reliability issues and this, that, and the other thing. But in an age where reliability, as we've seen over the last, handful of races this season, pretty much all of these cars are finishing. Like when I was growing up watching F1, you'd like at the beginning of every race, you'd have probably like 3 or 4 cars not even start. And so I think now that reliability is much less of a factor, easily they could win every, if it's not Max, it's Checo, but I think the car is there. If Checo gets its shit together, I think easily they could win every single race this season. And we've seen their dominance across all the different tracks, right? Like we're now far enough in the season where we've seen street tracks, we've seen purpose-built tracks, we've seen everything in between, and that car is just steamrolling everybody across the board.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm gonna agree. Like Red Bull's what, I think 9 in a row, and but it's like I'm a little upset that Sergio like took a couple of those, because I think it would have been cool if Max has just won every race of the season. But now that they're on this streak, I do want them to take it. The only thing I'd say is a little bit boring is they never show Max because he's so consistent. He's so like boring, I guess, because he's just driving on rails the whole time. That he never gets any TV time. But to Sam's point, the reliability this year is kind of astonishing. I've been waiting for Max's car to blow up or Sergio's car to blow up, but they're like even last year, like Alonso was retiring like race after race in the Alpine, and like the Ferrari is like lit on fire. Red Bull had a couple of like reliability issues at the start, and like Sam said, like everybody's finishing this year, and it's kind of like astonishing that people have been like even Alfa Romeo was like a master disaster, and they're even finishing this year. So yeah, it's just kind of crazy. And if it does continue, I think Red Bull will probably win every race, and most likely that being Max. Actually, today when Max was talking about hitting a bird, I was like, here we go. That's it. We're gonna get our first Red Bull DNF. Like you can't hit a bird, you can't hit anything at 200 miles an hour, and and I was like, nothing happened. They didn't even show a replay of it. So.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm ready
that bird got
I'm ready to see the video of the bird just exploding.
Yeah, I mean,
that bird got a P1 before before any of those drivers ever will. So, shouts to that bird.
I forget what sport it was. It was another racing sport, but there's the YouTube video of like a rabbit running across the track, and like it barely just touches the corner of a car, and it just vaporizes into a pink mist. And I think the bumper even rips off the car. So I'm just like, I just imagine you smash into an animal at full speed, your car is disintegrating, but I guess not.
Yeah, give me full Randy Johnson hitting a bird with his pitch vibes.
Yeah.
So would you say, you had mentioned, Chris, that Alfa Romeo is consistently finishing. A lot of cars are consistently finishing except for Logan Sargent. Do you think these are stepping stones towards we talked about parity before on this show, Chris. Are these the stepping stones to a more even grid, or do you think that the delta between the front runners and everyone else is just still too much to overcome?
I mean, so like I'll let Sam touch on this a little bit because I know he has some thoughts about Formula One being a technical sport as much as it is as a driver sport. Building the car is a big part of it. So yeah, actually, Sam, I want you to touch on that because I think you have some good points on that, about the whole disparity between top and bottom teams and why that's important.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think maybe we'll get into this later, maybe we won't. But I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that this is not like Formula One is great for as a racing car sport, but one of the reasons why people love it so much, and I think this is what makes it so much different. And maybe I don't really follow baseball, but maybe baseball is a little bit like this. But Formula One is such an engineering sport as much as it is a racing sport. So people who love just like general cars and engineering and technology, um, I think that also brings a lot of fans, and there are plenty of people who just like it specifically for that reason, and not again like not knowing a ton about NASCAR and some of the other racing sports, but like a lot of the technology that goes into regular everyday cars now comes from Formula One, like brake by wire, and all of these different things. It's basically like Formula One is sort of a testing ground for that technology, and so for that reason, I think it sort of has its place on high a little bit differently than other sports. And I think in any sport, you're always going to have you're always going to have these top teams, um, and I think that there are I don't know that there's a way around that. Like everyone has a cost cap now. I think it'll probably be a couple more years until that really evens out. But at the end of the day, there are all these different loopholes, and I don't know that the disparity is ever gonna close. Like I don't know that that gap is ever gonna close because you know Ferrari is Ferrari and Mercedes is Mercedes, and in addition to being able to work on their Formula One cars, they have all this other stuff that's happening in the background of their manufacturing and all of these other ideas that are coming from different places where Williams probably doesn't have that, or they have it secondhand, or even a manufacturer like Alpine run, previously Renault, like they might have some of that, but it's not to the caliber of some of these other big teams. And and to my point about recruiting, like all of this top talent, even if you're going to get paid the same whether you're at Williams, Haas, or Mercedes, you're probably going to want to go to Mercedes. So I think it's a very long conversation. I think the cost cap will be helpful eventually, but I don't know how helpful that will ultimately be. And I think the teams at the back will sort of always be kind of circulating in this loop of like maybe the last three or four teams just sort of circulate, and the midfield kind of circulates, and then the top three teams sort of circulate that well. But I don't know, like Aston Martin has made the biggest jump by far, which does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. There was the year where Jenson Button won the championship at Braun GP, and they literally like had no sponsors. I think Chris, you had mentioned this, but they had no sponsors, and it was just like a white car, and they came in, and dusted everyone, and so there's always going to be examples like that, but I don't know. It's a tough one.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to unpack there, right? I think the first one is the concept of legacy and how that, attracts audiences, but it also has a tipping point, right? In 2007, you had the Patriots go 16-0, and everyone was, uh, anticipating that they go perfect throughout the entire postseason as well. 1972, the Dolphins won 17-0. So they had a perfect season. It doesn't happen all the time, right? And the concept of a legacy in NFL and NBA with your Chicago Bulls or your New England Patriots, that's something that's digestible to US fan base. But when you look at it, it's seeped in a sport that that has a lot of different ways to kind of break in, right? Like the Denver Nuggets, I'll take a recent example. Denver Nuggets winning the NBA championship this year was very much like the Mavericks with Dirk winning in that one year where he kind of took over. There are breaks in legacies, and I think it's harder to obtain that in Formula One, to a lot of the points that you just mentioned, Sam, that it is a technical sport, and essentially the engineers are players in the game and the strategists are actual players in the game, even though the drivers are like essentially the pawn that they're moving around, in a sense. Where NFL and NBA, that pawn is dispersed amongst several different heads, and you actually have your head coach who's kind of controlling everything. So I think there's the concept of legacy teams that uphold a sport and really make sure that the audience have something to come cheer for. But then there's also the fact that we need to be able to have competitors come in at any given time and give us a show. Because if we go into a race already knowing everything, it takes away that sheen. Which takes me to my second point, is getting the American audience to appreciate some of the nuances in F1 compared to stock car races that they already know, like IndyCar and NASCAR. So the AP Press recently published some stats on the heels of the Canadian Grand Prix, essentially laying out the fact that NASCAR has had 10 winners through 16 races this year, and IndyCar has already had 5 winners across 8 races this year. F1 has only had 2, or yeah, Checo and Max, who have won across, what was this, race 6, race 5, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be any let up there. So I think having a way to showcase the nuances in the fights that happen in the front of the pack, middle of the pack, back of the pack, and highlighting those as detailed as possible in a way that that Americans can appreciate it, is going to be what keeps us on board, essentially, I think, as a whole, given how we can appreciate other forms of racing. Even though F1 is not a stock car race. So they tried doing that today, right? This is my third point. They tried doing that with the Will Arnett, Danny Ricciardo broadcasting. I know you guys have thoughts on that. So do you think do you think this is the right way to do it? Is just kind of shoveling, packaging together as fast as possible these kinds of elements that they work with the Manning cast? It should, or do you think there's a better way to do this, to get the American audience engaged and keep them engaged, and for the long run here with F1?
I think the idea is a great idea, but I think the execution specific to this was absolute disaster. And I actually felt, I think I have him on my losers list for later, but I actually felt bad for Daniel Ricciardo, because I think he's an incredible personality for Formula One. And I was really looking forward to having him commentate, especially it's always fun to have someone who, a lot of them are previous racers, but like someone who is very recently a racer, and especially him in particular, who's just a fun overall guy. And I was actually excited about Will Arnett, because I thought it would be funny just knowing that he doesn't really know a ton about Formula One. But I think just the execution of so I don't know if you guys watch it, but I made it through about 15 laps before I had to shut it off because it was so bad. And basically what happened was, you have Daniel Ricciardo, Will Arnett, and a stats guy, and then they randomly had Patrick Dempsey kind of pop on because he is a racer. But they didn't have anyone that was really leading the conversation and actually commentating. So you basically it was like incredibly boring, frankly. You had Daniel Ricciardo, who was sort of commentating on some stuff, but no, like again, no one was really leading the conversation, and Will Arnett doesn't know anything about Formula One as far as I know, or at least could tell, and so they're just literally not talking. And you have like in within the first few corners, you have Hamilton passing, like Hamilton gets a great start, passes Alonso for second, which is a huge moment. They're, the entire first few laps, they're staying relatively close to Max Verstappen, also a huge moment because usually he just takes off and he's like 20 seconds down the road. And then you have this sort of big scrap between Hamilton and Alonso, where ultimately Alonso passes Hamilton back, but like literally they're just sitting there, and Ricardo's kind of trying to explain to Will Arnett what's going on, but I think they really just needed someone who's like an exciting commentator who's constantly just saying like, these are all the cars on the grid, this is what's happening, this is what's moving, and then you have those people like sort of add in all of the color in the background. But good God, it was unwatchable. And this is the last part of my rant. The entire time they had the Formula One race, like the actual race part, letterbox. So you're basically watching Ricardo and Will Arnett and a couple of other random people. They're basically just floating heads. And to my wife's point, you're watching, if you're a Formula One fan, you're watching Formula One in the background with no sound, and then you're just watching like YouTube with Will Arnett and Daniel Ricciardo. And so it was very tough for me because I think, again, it could have been really cool, just very poor execution.
Was this like something they're planning on to do every race? But I was curious why they picked Will Arnett, because like I think you said it's because he's Canadian and it's Canadian race, but there's got to be some tons of celebrities that actually are into F1 and know a thing or two about the sport. Like that has to exist, right?
They're slated to do Austin and Vegas this year as well. And the funny thing is the Canadian it didn't even broadcast in Canada. So the Canadian GP version of this, it didn't even, you can't even access it if you're in Canada. So it's just poor execution. I think something that Sam mentioned is the constant commentary that's needed because you have cars going at nearly 200 miles an hour. That's the nature of the sport. There's 70 laps. Like you need to make sure someone has the acumen to comment on it as it happens in real time. Thinking of to an American comp that's really the format that's really successful is for TNT's NBA's commentators. You have Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal and Kenny Smith. All three of them were former players, all three really big personalities, and they play off of each other. But none of them has to be the play-by-play guy. They leave that up to Ernie Johnson, And Ernie he plays the straight man. It's almost like an ensemble. If you want to deliver comedy, you need to set it up like an ensemble cast. It needs to be like Arrested Development, essentially, where you have Michael playing the straight man to keep everything in line to bounce these like characters off of. And if you just have Will Arnett, I think should have been a guest. I think it should be Daniel Ricciardo and someone who's really good with F1, but maybe the public doesn't really know about him or her yet. They should have done a little bit more testing to see who would have been proper for that spot if this is something that they really want to lean into. Other than that, it just feels really gimmicky. It feels like a lot of other things that F1 does, like the stationary, yachts or whatever in Miami, or even the intro music. Like it's just all very gimmicky without them really understanding, I think, the DNA of American like sports and what we want out of a product. So yeah,
I just want to say that you hit it exactly. It was the Miami yacht of commentating.
Yeah. It works with the Manning brothers and the Manning cast because Eli and Peyton are both big personalities and they're both quarterbacks. They know the sport inside and out because that's the nature of that sport. The quarterback essentially knows everything because they have to. And when you have like multiple, championship quarterbacks that have personalities and their brothers, that's like striking gold. That's not something that you can just manufacture together and just put out there as a format. Just get Will Arnett because he has X many followers that overlap with F1, and he talks about it in passing a lot of times. They set him up to look kind of stupid, like as if like he didn't know anything. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe Will Arnett does know a decent amount about F1, but just can't translate it in the speed that's required for a broadcast and be able to commentate on it or play off of Danny Ricciardo. So I don't know. It's just, I think, another gimmicky thing. And I think it's all with good intent, right? To keep the American audience more engaged. But I think it's almost a stutter step towards that direction, as opposed to like a fully fleshed roadmap that could like kind of lead to success.
To your point, like you brought this up and it made me realize like there was nobody involved that had broadcasting experience, had commentating or casting experience. It was just like, let's throw these people together.
Patrick Dempsey doesn't have broadcast experience?
I don't know. But yeah, no, it's just like there's nobody to lead the game, right? There's nobody to like guide the comedy, guide the casting.
Yeah, and they'll get it. It's an easy fix. Like literally just throw someone in there to like be able to kick things off. But yeah, I mean, if you watch the beginning of it, like even the very start of the race, they're basically saying nothing. It's the weirdest, strangest thing.
But yeah, to your point, Shayem, like I like I'm an American F1 fan. Although like I'm more of I definitely love things for the sport more than I do for the glitz and glamour than maybe some other people. So like I think that they are going a little too fast with trying to just do Miami, do Vegas, like expand things as fast as possible and try to really capture. I thought it would be a little bit better if they like a little bit more of a slow burn and like do it right. Because like we already saw that there was a massive drop. Or I think there was a somewhat of a massive drop in attendance in the Miami GP this year, just because I feel like everyone's excited about Vegas now and they want to be there for the cars driving down the strip. Although, the initial thought is maybe the track isn't even that great. It's basically a lot of straight. So I just I'm hoping that they don't, do the flash in the pan and just burn out real quick, because I do like Formula One, but I don't necessarily want it to become every other American sport, every other American auto race, every other, the formulaic American sport. Like I wanted to maintain its legacy as, a great worldwide pinnacle of motorsport. So,
Yeah, I think and we'll before we pivot to our next subject here, I think one thing to note, and it's important to kind of understand how American entertainment works. Like, we don't do things half baked. If a pilot doesn't, even a pilot that goes to being tested is looked at by numerous different people internally at a studio, or tested against like test audience before it even goes out to the public. And as soon as they see the ratings are not good, they're able to cut it. What I'm trying to get at is Americans don't like they can smell it. We've been consuming and producing entertainment for the entire world for damn near 100 years now. The studio system has been cranking things out. We're not the BBC. We don't put out 7 episodes of Sherlock's over the span of 10 years. We send out 22 episodes of 30-minute comedies every single year. That's the machine that we have. That's the kind of expectations that we have. And I think, F1 and the FIA is more of a foreign entity kind of looking in on America, thinking like, hey, let's just try to jam a square peg into a round hole and hope to God the sides kind of smoothen out and it'll fit in somehow, as opposed to like, let's take a moment to really smoothen things out and then place it in there and make sure it just stays. The peg, is structurally sound. That's what pilot season is all about. That's why studios green light certain types of movies during certain seasons with certain kind of actors. It's just how we've essentially have a business model behind entertainment. So I think they need to appreciate the fact, like, or who, whoever's putting on a lot of the decision making for these kinds of events, they need to understand Americans and how they digest sport and how they digest entertainment, in general. So, again, lot to unravel there, but a point that I made earlier is about the nuances in appreciating how not just the front runners, but other teams and other racers in the mid pack, and how can we bring them up to bubble them up to the top. So this week, Alex Albon, I think all across our boards and many others just kind of put it to the metal and really impressed us. And I think it's worth spotlighting him in the context of everything else. He's just been driving that Williams the way George drove that Williams. I'd love to get y'all's thoughts on Alex Albon this race, but also in the grand scheme of just the driver the driver roster for this year. Where do you think Alex Albon stands?
Yeah, I mean, Alex for me is just all class right now. He's like a really, like you said, like top of the mid pack. I think he's a great leader for Williams and for that team. And honestly, it's been really impressing me. Like you talked a little bit before about sort of the disparity between teams, but there are a little bit of disparity between drivers, and like you see that with Max and Sergio. Like Max is doing things in that Red Bull that Sergio just can't. And Alex is doing the same against Logan. Now I know Logan's a rookie, but Alex is showing like what disparity can be, like what a driver can do in a car. Now I do know that he had upgrades on his car, and this time that Logan didn't. And Logan unfortunately had a critical failure in DNF, but Alex like is showing what that car can do, and I almost kind of want to see what he can do in that car over another year, even though I think he deserves a better seat. But like, what happens if Williams like pulls an Aston Martin and just builds a potential rocket ship for next year, because now they have a new team principal that's been at Mercedes, and I'm excited to see what they can do. But yeah, Alex is like great. I'm so glad he's sitting in F1 again. I think he deserves his seat. And it's just exciting to watch him. He's a true competitor.
So quick exercise here. I'm gonna list off some names, and you guys tell me if Alex Albon is a better driver than the name. Okay.
Let's go for it.
I like this.
Yeah. All right. So Logan Sargent.
Of course.
Yes.
Nick DeVries.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kevin Magnussen.
Yes.
Yes.
So Guan Yu.
Yeah, I think so.
A little tough to tell, but I'll go with a yes.
Yeah.
Why is it tough to tell, Sam?
I think Zhou just has had a really rough time of it, and I think he's better, and he's just like when you're watching Alonso all these years in like a car that breaks down all the time, or just in the wrong spot at the wrong time. I think he's kind of had similar, like you just have these drivers, and Chris, I'm terribly sorry about this, but Bottas is the same, right? Like good driver, but just is always in the wrong place at the wrong time. And just there's like this weird Formula One force of will that favors some drivers over others. And I think Zhou just has like been one of those unlucky drivers. So I would just say
Sans invisible hand, Zhou Guan Yu over Alex Albon. That's a haiku for the day.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's keep going. So, do you guys think he's better than Nico Hülkenberg?
Yes.
How about Yuki?
Ooh, TBD for me.
Yes. Mainly because he keeps a cool head. I think Yuki's a good driver, but he has a lot to learn.
He has a lot of more. I'm on par with you, Sam. There, I think he has a little bit more maturing that needs to happen. All right, let's get into a little bit more. So what about some of these other mid pack names? Lando Norris.
I mean, no. I think Lando is potential championship caliber in the future. Like, Yeah, I mean, Lando for me is like one of those guys that I'm worried is gonna get like I forget what they call him, but like lost in his prime years because of guys like Max Lewis and Alonso, and he may never get his shot. The same with like Charles. But I definitely think Lando is up there in sort of top talent and potentially Oscar as well. So no, I mean I think Lando overall is probably a better driver, but I think Alex still has pretty close talent, maybe right behind those guys.
What about Oscar Piastri? Do you think Alex is better than Oscar?
For now, just because of his experience, although I do think Oscar has like massive potential under him.
Okay. How about the two Alpines, Esteban and Pierre? Do you think he's better than either of those guys?
Yes.
Better than both?
Yeah, big
Yeah.
yes.
Wow. Okay. All right. Let's go up a little bit further. So, how about George Russell?
No, unfortunately. And that was going to be my one comment to you earlier that, like you said, hopefully he wins a championship. I almost disconnected at that moment, but unfortunately, George, I think, is also up there with potential future champions, just like you said.
All right.
Yeah. I want to say I think he's kind of at George's level, but I feel like if he was, then he'd probably have a better seat. It's always tough because the second seat at Red Bull is next to impossible, and I think Checo is sort of the perfect driver because at least in the very beginning he did not give two fucks at all. And I think that benefited him a lot just to sort of like ease into it and not have that pressure. And I think Albon was sort of rocketed up to the seat, and then Red Bull is just full of pressure, so it's tough. But
So I'm getting somewhere with this. So the last couple of names left, Valtteri Bottas. Do you think he's better than Valtteri?
I don't want to answer this question.
I'd say he's on par, maybe a little better.
And I'm assuming, he's you guys aren't going to put him ahead of Carlos Sainz, are you?
I would put him. I want to put him just to like be super devil's advocate. I would put him on like the Carlos Sainz, George Russell level. Like really deserves a top seat, but probably wouldn't win a championship there.
And last but not least, is he better than Lance Stroll?
I'm excited to be here just for you to say his name. I just want to get this out because I've been listening to the podcast for a while, and every time you talk about Lance Stroll, I just want to like jump into the podcast and say this.
Let's preach to the choir.
I think Lance Stroll is the most mediocre driver in Formula One maybe ever, and like not in like a mediocre bad way, but just if someone like all the time people ask the question, is it the car or is it the driver? And I think that Lance Stroll is the perfect person to answer that question of, if you could put like everyone's always saying, you could put anyone in the Mercedes from their era and they could win a race. You could put anyone in a Red Bull right now and they could win a race. I think Lance Stroll is like the perfect driver to actually test that. It's like the amalgamation of all drivers.
Yeah.
I totally get where you're coming from there. He's almost like a mannequin. He's like a crash test dummy with a smile.
I mean, I think he has great moments. I think he has really dumb moments. He, like, at least for me, he truly is the like most middle of the road driver you could possibly imagine.
I mean, he showed some sort of gumption when he broke his hand and came right back in. And I was like, man, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I need to lift my, jaded kind of shades here and kind of see him through a new lens. But man, did he give me a reason to put those shades right back on. Chris, what do you think about Lance Stroll?
I mean, so I'm gonna put Lance in the bucket of guys like Valtteri, and I don't want to ever talk bad about Valtteri, but like, listen, the guy's like checked out a little bit. He's like focused on business ventures, and I think the difference of a great driver and a good driver is like willing to take risks and put the car. Like, there was a moment today where Valtteri was trying to pass. Man, I can't remember who it was, but he actually had his nose in front, and then right before we get to the apex, he just breaks and goes behind. I think it was Lando that he was fighting, and I was just like, Valtteri, like, break later and like go for it. Like, and I just don't think he has that gumption anymore. So I think Lance is like knows how to drive a car. He's a capable Formula One driver, but he just doesn't. He doesn't have that fire. He doesn't have that ability to put the car on the limit, and therefore when he needs to, he doesn't know how to control the car when it's at the limit. So like he can't do the things that these top drivers do. So like, yeah, he can get the car around the lap and he can, get some points and do that, but he's just never going to be great. And I mean, you know how I feel about Lance. Like, he's just kind of there, and I think he, like, if Lawrence wants to win the championship or at least get up there, he eventually has to go, and I think he probably knows that. I actually think he's gonna go this year, but we'll see. The guy has a Loctite job, most likely forever.
I mean, he'll definitely get a handsome severance package if he does get asked to leave. But going back to my point, in all seriousness, do you think Albon would be a good fit for that Aston Martin 2 driver spot?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think? What do you think is the ceiling and the floor for Albon in realistically in that car?
I mean, I think Albon. It's hard to tell because I think that, like, Alonso still puts up better numbers than him, at least at the moment. But I think that they could, put some double podiums up there. Like, I think it's going to be difficult to get Max off the top step unless something does happen to his car. But I could definitely see if Alex is in there getting a 2 and a 3, um, pending like a Mercedes track, whether it's a good track for Mercedes or not. But
I
I
guess
definitely.
another I guess another way to ask that would be, do you guys think the delta for the constructor championship between the amount of points that Checo and Max would bring in would get cut would be a lot more competitive if it was Alex Albon and Fernando Alonso? Do you think having that driver pairing would cut the constructors championship delta down to Red Bull? And if so, by how much?
That is a good question. I mean, floor and ceiling, I think, Chris, to your point, I think he could maybe luck into a second place, but probably realistically, he's like fighting kind of within, maybe between like 5 and 3 or 6 and 3 or something. I mean, if you look at like the top teams, you sort of just end up a little bit lower. But I think he kind of floats around where Alonso is, maybe a little further back. But yeah, it's tough because the Red Bull, with the exception of like the last few races, I think once Checo like really starts to get it together again, I think it's a very hard train to stop. But I would say that they would definitely cut in. Like, I don't know how close it would be, but I think that they would for sure cut in a lot more. And I think, frankly, now Mercedes is going to end up running away with the second place championship. And again, Chris, to your point, I think that with Lance there, I don't know if he'll go this year. I think he might go at the end of next year. Like, I think this year will be the year where his dad is like, okay, like, we really have a good car, and now it's not like we're not even fighting for the top of the midfield anymore. Like, we actually are in a solid position. And so maybe by the end of the next year, he'll be like, okay, if I really want to actually win championships, then this is what I need to do. But um, yeah, I think it would definitely make second play, and like it still may end up being close, but I think it would definitely keep second place way tighter, and you never know. Like if Checo keeps screwing up and you have an Albon in that second seat, and Alonso's consistently getting like, twos and threes along with Hamilton, and maybe Albon's fighting with Russell for three and third and fourth. I think it definitely, like, you're dropping Checo down the order pretty quickly. So who knows?
I definitely think
no,
Checo. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think Sam. I think I'm on par with where Sam's thoughts are in terms of there's probably a conservative step up for Aston Martin to where maybe they're not completely in Red Bull's rear view, right, in terms of Constructors Cup championship points, but they'll definitely make sure they keep they keep it interesting with Mercedes, and definitely pull away from Ferrari. So I think, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong there, but it sounds like you're saying that if the ceiling with Alex in seat with Fernando would allow them to at least fight consistently for P2, P3, P4, whereas if I don't see any fix for Ferrari's debacle right now, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but is that fair to say, Sam and Chris? Do you think that their ceiling is they'll definitely be able to pull away from Ferrari and make really interesting things happen against Mercedes, and the floor being that they're kind of just where they are now? Is that a fair assessment, you'd say? Just kind of our foresights on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. All I know is that everything that we just talked about is getting me super excited for silly season this year, because I do want to see some driver shakeups. I want to see a little bit of change, and not just in all these technical director shifts around, but I definitely I want to see Charles get so mad that he leaves Ferrari, and I want to see Lawrence get so tasteful for the podium that he gets rid of Lance, and and obviously I want Nick out of the sport. And sadly, I'm wondering if Valtteri stays in the sport as well. I like I said, I don't feel the fire from him anymore, but I'm excited for some new talent and some new driver pairings to take things to the next level.
I won't harp on this much longer, but who are some other potential driver, now that the season is kind of fleshing out a little bit more and we're not speculating completely on preseason thoughts, who else would be a good person to fill in that D2 position at Aston Martin?
I mean, I said it already. I want Charles in that seat. I think today Ferrari was able to sort of put up a good result, but as I said to my F1 fantasy group, a broken clock is right twice a day. I think eventually, they have to get one or two races right. So I think the Ferrari strategists aren't out of the woods yet. And just 2 races ago, Charles was ready to tear his hair out. And if they get their stuff together, maybe he'll stick around. But if he can't get that car on the podium, if he can't get his strategist to listen to him, we can't work together, I think he'll eventually say enough is enough, and I want to be in a car where I can maybe win a race or two, and potentially WDC in the future. That's who I want to see in that seat if the car remains good, fast, and Lance indeed does go.
Sam, do you have a third name that you want to toss in, or do you think Charles and Alex are the two prime fits for that job?
I know it's not going to happen because I think he's like too involved with the team, but I think Lando, I mean, I think he would be a great driver there. I think it's, probably not, like, for sure not going to happen. I think they're really building, McLaren is really building the team around him, and I think they have a really strong pairing with Piastri as well. So I don't necessarily see McLaren trying to like nudge Lando. And I think while they have been sort of abysmal in the beginning of the season, I think they're kind of on an upward trajectory. And at the end of the day, like, the last 2 seasons have been tough, and before this, Mercedes dominance, but like McLaren's McLaren. They're no joke of a shop. And I think I think they could definitely have a come up over the next few years. At least really be fighting more consistently than they are.
And I hope that they do,
I
because sorry to interrupt you, but I want McLaren to I want to see the four-way fight at the top, or maybe maybe five. Like, I want to see Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, and Aston and Ferrari. I want to see them all competing, because I think they all have the talent and the drivers and ready to go. But yeah, I mean, if Zach Brown's going to worry more about sponsor paint than he is going to build a championship car, then I'd be happy to see Lando in that seat too.
That leaves us with our winners or losers and our hot seats.
Yeah.
Who you guys got winners for this week?
I mean, I got Lewis. Like, Lewis is I'm so happy to see him back to form. He's a true champion, true competitor, and I want to see him on the podium more, and I want to see him get a little bit closer to Max every race if possible, because he's not going to win WDC this year. But I want to see him not give up for that in future years, because I know it was probably hard for him last year, especially going from losing Abu Dhabi and then getting into the worst car you've ever driven. It's probably like tough for a guy like that. But so happy to see him get back to form. And then of course I got Albon. We just talked about him. Like, he's performing way above his level in that car. And yeah, I just want to see him keep putting it up there, and eventually hopefully that car will get on the top, or he'll get a seat to do it.
Sam, who's your winner for the week?
Now I'm kind of rethinking it. I put Ferrari, just because I think they ended with about as good of a result they possibly could have. I think they lucked into it, honestly. And especially if you see, Leclerc like fuming at the strategy, and both drivers really sort of being furious with the strategists and the team. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. But in air quotes, well done, Ferrari. They definitely ended up in a pretty decent position.
All things considered.
All things considered.
Yeah.
Leave it to Ferrari to screw everything up and just dumb luck into a couple good spots.
Hey, that's, at least they finished. I think Carlos Sainz at one point just totally told his strategist to fuck off. And I guess that's what needs to happen for them to be able to get any semblance of success here. Winners for me, Alex Albon. I think he showed shades of George Russell. I love his personality. If you've heard me before on the show, I personality speaks a lot to me. It also probably says a lot about how much they are willing to put in work for whatever team they're at, so I think there's a lot of championship mentality in that guy, and I'd love to see him kind of flourish with the up and coming team. I also have Oscar Piastri, and I actually split the two McLaren drivers today. I think Oscar, I was tough on him to start the season, just because, he has the track record of excellence, and I think he should be scrutinized as such. And, I think he's showing that upward trend that you had mentioned, Sam, in terms of, he's not going to go straight into, P4, P5 or anything like that. But, today he shucked out, what was it? He's at, he's P11, so right outside of points, but it's at least it's on an upward trend. So I think that he's showing signs of getting something out of that car that maybe we'll see flourish a little bit more into 2024. And kind of going into losers, Lando Norris. We could talk a little bit at length about that weird unsportsmanlike kind of penalty that he got, but even with that not factoring in, I think when you compare him to Oscar Piastri this year, a rookie coming in, they're almost on par with each other. And that's troublesome, right? Because if you call last year, that was a position that Daniel was in, or he was kind of, even further back. But this might be something that Lando needs to start looking into a little bit. If the team is going to be his, this might be a situation where, two butting heads are gonna, potentially turn a developing team into something that crumbles before they even get to get that car to where it should be. And then I have Sergio as well. Just tough day a tough week for him. The gap between him and Max is just growing larger. It's harder to justify his performance gap, given that they're in the same car. He's this master of kind of the street circuits, but what you have, kind of recalling what you said earlier, Sam, this Red Bull team has gone through an array of different types of tracks, and by virtue of Max's, driving, they've been able to succeed at all of them. So it's really starting to show the limits of Checo's talents, which I don't think he's an untalented driver. I think he's an incredible driver, but it's really starting to show it in terms of what his ceiling is and what his floor is, and what Max's ceiling is and what Max's floor is. So those will give me my two losers for this week. What do you guys have?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go Sergio too. Somebody online made a really good point that made me think really hard, and it was like, if you had two copies of Sergio Perez at Red Bull, would we think that they're as dominant as they are today? Because maybe they get fifth and sixth today.
That's a good point.
And it's like, I was just sitting there thinking, like, is it just Max or is it Red Bull? Because Sergio has had poor races the last three races, and I don't know whether it's the car, whether it's the team sabotaging his car, which I think is unlikely, but potentially possible, or Sergio can't handle the pressure of fighting for a champion chip, that close. Like, he basically thinks he can do things he can't do, and he makes mistakes. So yeah, I think Sergio is like having three not so great races in a row. Like, obviously he's still finishing in the points, but I think it's definitely a sign of he's falling apart a little bit. But then I have I have Logan and Nico on there, mainly because Nico got his qualified P2, got his penalty, and then for some reason the Haas car just can't keep up pace in the race. I don't know what the disparity is there. They have good one lap pace, and they just seem to go nowhere throughout every race and just sort of fall back and do nothing. And then Logan's having a tough year. I mean, he's a rookie. It's understandable, but he's kind of been nowhere. He gets he DNF'd more than once, and he's not putting up any points. He's not showing too much promise, and his teammate is destroying him. So we'll see what happens with them throughout the year, but today just was not another good day for him.
Yeah, I think for everyone, just that ability to show promise, even if you're not in a great car, I think that really sort of stands above anything else. And even if it's hard to come in last every single race for sure, but even if there are ways to show promise even in last place. I really don't like George Russell, but like both he and Albon really in a pretty much last place car really are able to kind of show their colors, and I think that's what makes the difference. I had for losers, I had Haas. You were just talking about them, Chris. They're just, as much as I love Gunther Steiner, and you guys have talked about this a lot, but they are for real just nowhere.
Yep.
And it's a bit painful to watch. And I think the biggest problem, which has always been both for Magnussen and for Hulkenberg, and it's even funnier now because for whatever strange reason I've started to go back and watch the 2010 season. And Hulkenberg is there still, retroactively still, doing Hulkenberg things.
Yeah, looking exactly the same.
I think it's, yeah, and I think it's just this lack of driver awareness, and I think they both suffer from this. Is it's it's a lack of awareness and lack of ability to know when you shouldn't do stuff, and maybe that's ultimately the same thing, but like, you're going into turn one, everyone's going to be braking, you should probably brake a little bit early. Your fight at the end of the day is not with them. Like, you need to be consistent, you need to not get in wrecks, and you need to, like, that you're going to move backwards anyway. And like, it's tough from an outsider's perspective, and I know, um all these guys are feeling an immense pressure, and like they all want to win even if they're in the crappiest car. So I understand, like, just wanting to kind of manifest turn one overtakes, but I think it's a lack of knowing where you are and where you're not. And I think, to like, ultimately in Formula One, you have to have consistency, and those are really the drivers who have like super consistency. I wouldn't call it calm, but just like kind of knowing your space. Those are the people who really do move up. But to just like basically almost slam in to the person in front of you, like, you have to know that that's not your race. You need to, I'm talking myself in circles, but you basically just need to know that that's not your race, and
You're
not
talking yourself in
like,
Haas.
I'm talking myself in Haas. But yeah, it's tough to see them, just because I think I don't know who you get in that car, in either seat, frankly. Like, part of the reason why they wanted Hulkenberg and Magnussen there is because they need to develop the car, and you really need someone who's not a rookie who understands how to develop a car. So I think it's not as easy as just like getting in fresh new talent, especially the people that come from F2. Like, they kind of understand that, but F2 is all spec cars, so there's a lot of like feedback that's probably quite different than what you're giving in Formula One. And so, Mazepin was a hot mess. Schumacher, I think it was tough for sure. I kind of wish they would have like given him a little more time, but I think just crashing the car all the time didn't help. Um, but again, I kind of understand like the need to have someone who's in a place where they can like really give a lot of constructive feedback. I have no idea who they would get, because I don't know who's going to want to drive that car. But yeah, they're really, really in a rough spot.
I think that's a good point you made, Sam, is the lack of a driver pipeline, like from the development stages through like the super license points that they need to get them to be ready to not just be drivers on the grid, but also be able to give feedback in the ways that Lewis and Fernando are able to do. Kind of tightening that learning curve for them is something that, to our earlier point, could introduce parity in a really organic, sustainable way, is having some more emphasis on this driver pipeline. And the second thing I wanted to know, because you guys both have Haas on, your losers list, is one lap pace in quali is somehow astounding with these guys. Like, I don't understand where they pull it out of. Do you almost wish that, is it better to have a one lap quali that's that fast, knowing that your car is just going to suck in race? Or would you rather have it to where you have consistent qualifying, maybe not as high, and then you're at least finishing kind of, in that P11, P10, P12 kind of spot, which I think seems more realistic for this car? What's a better case scenario for you guys? I think it's the latter. I think everyone thinks it's the latter, but there's something about seeing a Nico Hulkenberg in P2, and during quali, that might spark some sort of upward momentum. What do you guys think?
I mean, it makes headlines and it makes you talk about it. But listen, I fall for this trap every time. Every single time they end up at the top, I'm like, Haas has done it. Let's go. And then same thing every race, just nowhere land. And I'll
Hey,
probably fall for it next
as a
time.
Texas Longhorn, I totally get where you're coming from. So say less.
Maybe they're just putting
Yeah,
too
I
much.
mean,
Sorry, my last point is maybe they're just putting too much fuel in the car and they don't know. Maybe they're overweight or something, and they need to figure that out because I don't understand how they're so slow compared to quality.
Hopefully they
yeah, I
fired that
mean,
second jack man.
yeah, it's also tough because like with all the park gourmet restrictions and the way that it works is you're basically setting up your car for race day. Like you're not there's like a couple things that you can tweak here and there, but you're basically setting up your car for race day. You're not it's not like a separate setup for qualifying necessarily. And I think again, it's like the same thing with Botas, like incredible at qualifying, has great one lap pace. But it's the true like top tier, S tier drivers like Max and Lewis and a handful of other people. You have to have absolute like unwavering consistency throughout, like every single gear shift, every single corner, and then you have to be able to do that over 70 laps. I mean, that's insane. And like maybe you get a couple of laps to rest here and there when you're kind of like lift and coasting, or keeping things cool or whatever. But for the most part, like those guys are like driven to a level that you just it's like almost impossible to come by. And just to kind of circle back, that sort of brings up Daniel Ricciardo, who's my other loser, just because good God, that if you want to show people how you commentate, that was quite rough. But I think, when he was racing, it's like he would always have these moments in these great races and he'd be like, I'm Daniel Ricciardo and I'm back, and you get so excited, but like for whatever reason, the next race he just loses that concentration, or his head isn't in it for one reason or another, and it just isn't there. And it's I kind of equate Formula One racing as a team to making a movie, right? Like if you want to make a good movie, you can't just have one producer or one director who has a really good idea. You need the director with the vision, who shares a vision with the director of photography, who shares the vision with the set decoration, and all of that stuff. It's like one big team, and everyone has to have the same shared vision and focus. And I think it's tough to come by for sure.
To your point, Sam, real quick, like about the consistency over 70 laps, that kind of makes Alonso that much more impressive to me. Because I think one of the biggest things that guys like maybe Nico or Kevin or someone like Valtteri kind of go through is like your age and just like being able to have the endurance to do the same, like, leg cramps from braking and, shifts over 70 laps and getting those airtight. And Alonso's 41 years old now or whatever, racing guys that are, in their 20s. And I'm just like, I don't know how much of a factor that plays, but just knowing what aging feels like for myself, I know it's probably pretty exhausting. I mean, Kevin's a dad and, like didn't even know he was going to be in a car until like a week prior, last year. So yeah, it's like that's a good point just about the potential for Haas and maybe why they're not good over 70 laps as compared to one, because one lap pace you just have to do it once. So yeah, speaking of one lap screwing up, let's talk about lap 35 with Mr. Nick DeVries. He's my hot seat for today, because what is this guy doing in Formula One? I don't know, but he definitely brought up Nikita Mazepin, and I don't know why he reminds me of him. He just reminds me of a guy that shouldn't belong in the car, but which is weird because he's a racing champion and he did so well at Monza last year. And but when I watched him try to do the overtake on Magnussen and bump into him and then lock up and cut him off and go into the runoff, I was just like, I don't know what's going on. This guy is needs to get out here. I've been talking about him all year, but I haven't seen any promise out of the guy.
He's almost so bad that I don't even want to see him go back to commentating. I just want him to like just make a silent outro and just never, come back to the sport. And who knows, maybe he'll come on the show one day or maybe not. But for right now, I have also wanted to say that I hate his driver profile picture. It makes me feel like he belongs in Slytherin, but like not the cool Slytherin kids, like the ones that would hang out with Malfoy, like,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, dude, you had like this whole like spiel coming into the sport about how you're gonna take over. You're here to get Yuki's like seat, and I'm glad Yuki's just like kind of keeping him at bay like by a lot. I yeah, I don't understand why he's in the sport. Again, I think it points back to a more deeper seated issue about driver pipeline and development, and having a stable of drivers that by F1 standards can, even get in with super license points. I agree there with you, Chris. He's in my hot seat. I also have, Lawrence's son on the hot seat. We talked at length about, Alex taking over potential D2s that could take in that seat. I also think that, towards the end of next year, the weight of a championship and constructors and fighting for it, and kind of, shareholders, expectations across Aston Martin is going to take a big factor here. If this car, I guess, wasn't up to par, maybe he would extend out to 2015 even. But the car is a good car. They have Mike Crack at the helm. Like, they have a good thing going. And, Lawrence put in a lot of money to develop that facility. So I just don't think the love of a father is going to extend past 2024. What say you, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, he was in my hot seat as well. Sort of, I put this note that says for the long game, but I think you're totally right, and I am curious. I think a lot of chips need to fall in order to really have him be gone. I think it's, like, is if Lawrence Stroll really is a businessman, if his ultimate goal is just to kind of make money and like be a part of this team, and build it, but not necessarily do much with it. Totally, he can have his son keep on driving, and ultimately, it's possible that's what he's in it for. If he's making money, great. Um, but I think ultimately, if they want to win championships, which at least on this current trajectory, I think they can, or at least be fighting for them. He for sure needs to go. Like, again, you just need someone who's super consistent. Even if you're not getting, you know, top five consistently, like, you have to be in the points, and you have to be around for when, the Red Bulls, the Ferraris, and the Mercedes crash out or hit a wall or something. Like, you kind of, that old saying, you have to be in it to win it. Even if you're at the top of the midfield, like, you have to be absolutely ready to pounce at all times. And I think that will, and I think that's why, like, probably not this year, but maybe at the end of next year, if they're still fighting for second in the championship, who knows? Someone else might come in.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think, if it's a publicly traded company, they have board members. Lawrence put up his, some of his own capital here to build this out. It's just a lot, going against Lance. I almost think, if they did a 1-for-1 trade for Lance to Williams and then Alex Albon to Aston Martin, that might fulfill a lot of different that might check off a lot of different kinds of boxes, right? You'll still have Lance in the sport. His dad's not going to totally abandon him. He's in a seat that like is much more suited for his skill set at the moment, to give him a chance to kind of prove himself as worthy of like maybe being on a higher level team. But I think just the quick turnaround of success that team has experienced, like, Lawrence made a really astute decision by bringing on Fernando when he did, and I think there's a lot more pointing to Lawrence potentially, cutting his son than I think we're probably seeing. But I also saw that, you have Leclerc on your hot seat. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Why is he on your hot seat, Sam?
Yeah, I think he's just on my hot seat because, uh, like right now in current silly season fashion, I don't know where he goes, but he's got to get out of Ferrari. Like,
Yeah.
and I love or used to love Ferrari. I grew up in the Schumacher days, and you know, when you think of Formula One or you think of literally any race car, even if you type in the race car, if you type in race car and you get the first emoji comes up, it looks like a Ferrari. Like Ferrari is racing, and that's why I don't think they'll ever leave the sport. And shout out to them, they just won Le Mans
Yeah.
for
Won
the
Le
first time
Mans.
since 1965. I don't know if they have right, but
Yeah.
have that right. But um, you know, I don't see Formula One without Ferrari, but man, I just think he has so much more potential. I think he's a little bit of a hothead, just because of his frustration and the pain points at Ferrari. But um, I think for his own sake, I kind of put him in my hot seat for just like put some feelers out there, and try and make a move. We'll see. They should
Yeah.
get rid of Russell, stick him in a Mercedes.
I
Yeah.
like George Russell. I'll leave
I
it
there
at
was a
that.
second where I liked him, and I just think he's like so um I don't know what the word is for it, but he comes off as very entitled to me, and especially after last weekend, he was like, "The sport is a lot more fun when the car is fast," and you're like, "What a piece of shit."
Listen, sometimes I sweat, and sometimes I'm like, holy shit, is it raining outside? It happens to the best of us. It took me a while to get. Look, I
I'm
I
not
totally
crying;
get
it's
where
just
he's coming
raining on my
from.
face.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I tell my therapist. So let's look into obviously we touched on the kind of the failure of the I guess the I don't even know what to call it, the Manning cast of F1. I don't even know if they know. I don't even know if they have coined a term for whatever the hell Will Arnett and Daniel Ricciardo did, but the reviews were not all that great across the Twitter sphere and across the internet. You guys obviously were not the biggest fans, but I think there's something here. I think there's something that you can use to, because the Manning cast is essentially if you're a serious football fan, it's not going to be your first watch. You're going to watch the game and with the right commentators to make sure that you're watching the game through a professional lens. But what the Manicast offers is, how do you appreciate? How can you regurgitate this game again? Like, how do you get them optimize the most value out of it? And I think that's where comedy and education kind of have to go hand in hand. Like, they're not just like haha funny and bringing in guests arbitrarily. They're trying to educate layman watchers or whatever in a way that they understand football while they're being entertained in a different sense. It takes a lot of testing to get to that point, and I think here keeping that format but really going deep to find the right personalities is going to be the way to get this across the line. What do you guys think about this like idea of a simulcast?
In I didn't get to watch it, so I just read the comments online, which were abysmal. Basically saying this was the worst thing ever to watch it. Um, it's probably not my cup of tea. Like I want to watch the purity of the sport for what it is, but I could see the audience who might be interested in it. Someone who has like this admiration for someone like Danny Rick, his smile, his charismatic attitude and personality, like getting to watch the race with him would be kind of fun. But they just need to do better.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think cool idea, really rough execution of it, and I don't think there's that much really that needs to be fixed to get it to a good place. And one of the things, other than like, firstly, you just need an actual commentator that's leading everyone through, and then you sort of like fill the gaps with funny stuff that they both say. I think the way that it was, they were like, it was two people who don't really know how to commentate in that way trying to commentate. So I think that's that's why it was so rough. But I also like the idea of, throughout the race, they always are, trying to get a hold of Gunther Steiner, Christian Horner, all the different team principals, and like sort of getting their input on the race and things like that. I think if you have that layer with funny people, it would just be cool. If you're, and I think that's the way that you sort of capture all audiences, where you have, like pure fans who want to know what's going on can watch, and then you have like Daniel Ricciardo saying funny shit every now and then.
Yeah.
And I think people will tune in for Daniel Ricciardo and Will Arnett to like have that funny stuff. But I think like having them lead with it is just not the way.
Yeah, and I think one other comp that I'll make here outside of just traditional, American sports is what Rogan did with UFC. I understand that maybe they pick Will Arnett and Danny Ricciardo because their, social demographics overlap with what F1's trying to capture right now, or trying to capitalize on a demographic that they're seeing growth in already. And with the UFC, you had someone organic like Joe Rogan, whose entire fan base essentially has a huge overlap with UFC fandom, and he himself is really well educated on it. So it made perfect sense to put him in that seat and really let that blossom and do it in an organic way. This seems really gimmicky and inorganic, and I think like they need to catch a whiff of that sooner rather than later, or the format's gonna go away. Which I think the format is good. It's just the people that you populated it with are not maybe the best ones to have at the moment.
They should have had Roger Federer on the show. I mean,
Yeah.
James Marsden. I mean, whoever was there on the track a couple
Elizabeth
times.
Holmes, like just populated with it's I see the value in it. They just need to make sure that they're not just half-assing it. So let's look into next week, guys. Austria, it's going to be again a fan favorite when it comes to tracks. A lot of places to overtake. Who are your predictions for pole sitters?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite tracks. I'm super excited. It's one of the races I want to go to live, just because there's some like awesome elevation changes and some coolness to the track. So, but I think we're going to get a repeat. I think it's going to be the same exact podium. I think Max is unstoppable, barring, not even a bird can stop his car. So I think he's going to be on top step, and we're going to see. And Alonso made a bold statement the other day that he said he's not going to miss another podium this year, and I believe him. I think he's going to do that. So and I think Lewis has that renewed fight in him. So I think we're going to see the exact same podium next week. Or I think we have a week off, unfortunately, sad times. But
yeah.
I'm
there with you. I think I'm going to stick with the lineup for today, or for this week: Max, Alonso, and Lewis. Mostly because it was nice seeing that. It's almost like a video game styled like ending. It's and then Adrian Newey up there. I think like across all of them, they had like 50 something like titles, and that's cool to see. Like that's something that if I were to have walked into the NFL while the New England Patriots were like the hot shit, not in my teens, I guess, I would have probably been a huge Tom Brady fan and it would have been great to see that decorum of like, hey, this top seeded team is just consistently killing it. You're a new fan. You're probably going to gravitate towards them more or less, or you're going to go to, your local like team. This was cool to see because the one-offs whenever Esteban kind of gets on there, like there is a certain kind of charm to that. But then you don't really see this too often. I haven't seen this before since the last 2 years that I've been watching F1, is the fact that Alonso was such a great driver at a certain period of time before I started watching. I can't appreciate or revere him as much, when I started in 2019, 2020, 2021. Now I'm starting to pick up on what that was, right? Like, yeah, I'm starting to understand what the greatness is like. and to see them up on that podium, I think it made this race a little bit more special for me. And I'm hoping to see it again. I wouldn't be surprised if George was able to eke his way into the podiums as well, just because, now I think he's going to be less susceptible to having the same mistake. But yeah, I think Max, Alonso, and some version of Lewis or George.
I don't know if you saw the post press conference, but it was, Lewis did his like congratulating everybody, but also like went into like the respect of the two greats that he was able to share the podium with, and he was actually giving Max a lot of praise and Alonso a lot of praise, which led to both of them feeling like they had to do the same thing. So it's just the three guys being like, these other two guys are the best drivers in the world. And it was actually kind of really funny and a little cute at the same time. But it was I think, like, just to your point, like he said, I don't think there's ever kind of been a podium like this. Like, these were like three massive champions on the podium at the same time, which is kind of cool.
I think the funniest thing is seeing people like Alonso through the lens of today, of him being like a nice, calm head in Formula One who is like now very good. But it's like every other champion, like he was a maniac when he when he was like at his prime, when he was winning at Ferrari. I think he won at McLaren. I'm totally blanking. But like Schumacher, Hamilton, Verstappen, Alonso, like maniacs.
Sebastian Vettel,
even Sebastian Vettel, yeah. Like I love Sebastian Vettel, and it was so much fun seeing him crush it for Red Bull. But like in his early days, like he was a crazy guy, and he learned a lot from Schumacher. And I think a lot of these top talent people are kind of learning that they really need. I think now more than ever, you really are hearing about people, or you're really hearing about these drivers that teams are building around. And I think Schumacher in a lot of ways sort of paved that way. Like, he took Ferrari by the reins and was like, we're not doing this, we're doing this. And before that, when he was at Benetton, it was the same thing. Like, I am Michael Schumacher and you will bend to my will. Ferrari is probably like the only team where it's more difficult to do that. And I think part of the reason why Leclerc is having so many issues is because I think he's trying to do that, but he's a little bit too nice. And he just, like, it's like racing. Like, you either need to do or you don't. Like, you just need to step up and take the reins and make it happen, or they're going to walk all over you as they have been. But I put Max, Lewis, because I think he'll have a really good race, and Checo in that order. Although I think it's possible that it could just be Max and Checo and then Lewis. But I think this track suits the Red Bulls quite well. So I have a feeling we're going to get some barnstorming laps by Max, and he'll just loop everybody as everyone else is kind of trolleying around.
He'll definitely be looping the Williams and Haas. So it sounds like, not too much of a shift in our predictions for going into next week. It's some iteration of Red Bull, Mercedes, and Red Bull, or Aston Martin. But no, any other thoughts for the race coming up? Anything that, if there was an outlier, any team that could potentially compete, if, let's say, if one of the front runners were to break down, who are you guys thinking?
Listen, the one thing that this hasn't happened a lot this year that, I think 2021 kind of spoiled me of was lap one, turn one chaos. Everyone's kind of kept it together a lot this year. There's been a couple bumps here and there, little end plates coming off, that kind of thing. But there's, no Guan Yu Zhou's upside down over the barrier, Bottas bowling into the back of everybody, destroying all the cars.
Absolutely annihilating the car.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone's been kind of behaving, which is like good.
It's bound to happen at some point.
It has to happen. So
one or two times.
If it's gonna happen, let's do it. And if it does, maybe we'll see a big shakeup and get somebody else on the podium. I don't know, like, maybe Ferrari wins a race. Maybe Lando puts it up there. There you go.
Yeah, maybe Yuki finally gets past P10.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I'm
we
down,
all live in world.
I'm down to see a McLaren on the podium.
Yeah, I will just say this one thing or maybe it's two things. But what's really interesting is, we've, to your point, Chris, have been so unbelievably spoiled by the last 2 years of racing. Like, really, that does not typically happen in Formula One. And if you look back at all the seasons, Formula One, I think, has a lot of excitement around it, but it's not always like the most exciting sport in the universe. And I think, kind of tying this back to teams, like certain teams being dominant and certain teams not, and if that will ever change. At the end of the day, Formula One, like, the purpose of Formula One is which car is the fastest car, like, around a track that is not just an oval. Who can build the fastest car? And I like that purity of Formula One, and I think that's in some ways a lot of what people don't necessarily understand, or at least like the American audience is like, the whole point is to build the absolute fastest car, and it's the FIA's job to, like, occasionally make it safer, and F1's job as a owner of a sport to get it as close as possible, and like have all these regulations and try and kind of squeeze the pack. And then you have, like, there used to be tire wars, and now you have Pirelli, like, specifically developing tires that fall apart faster to kind of have these change ups in the pit stops and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's inherent to the sport that you want the fastest race car, and I think that is where you sort of end up in, like, this weird spot where, like, you're just gonna have these powerhouse teams, and that might never change.
What you're saying is,
and the transmission.
What you're saying is F1 is a stock driver series. Almost, except for Nutella boy Nikita Mazepin.
Yeah.
Can't even leave up to stock driver. Well, this has been great, guys. We'll look forward to Austria in 2 weeks, right, Chris?
Yeah, the 30th. To the races on July 2nd.
On the 2nd. So we'll see you guys again then. Thanks for helping on with us for the Canadian Grand Prix.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.